Welcome to Midnight Menu Plus One. I'm Margot Moss, and my co-host Ray Kanata is out of town tonight, so it's just you and me for the next little while. So here we go. Midnight Menu Plus One is a food lifestyle show on the podcast network itsneworleans.com. Each week on Midnight Menu Plus One, we invite a member of New Orleans restaurant and food community to join us, and we invite them to bring along their own guest, a plus one. We never know who their plus one is going to be. Sometimes it's a friend, a neighbor, a family member, a fellow restaurant colleague. My special guest tonight on Midnight Menu is Steve Armbruster. Steve Armbruster is a recovering chef who now cooks only for family, friends, and for fun. For a time, mostly during the 1980s, he worked almost the entire spectrum of the New Orleans food scene, although never in the front of the house. He cooked in clubs, hotels, bistros, fine dining restaurants, movie sets, and food trucks. He also inhabited various intersections of food and music. He started a kitchen in the early days of Tipitina's. He was the original staff caterer at New Orleans Jazz Fest. And there is so much more to talk about with Steve, so let's just get going and introduce him. Thank you so much, Steve, for joining us. Welcome.
Well, it's good to be here. I hope it turns out to be a great pleasure. So far, so good.
In the first few seconds, nobody's crying.
Nothing's falling from the ceiling, yeah.
The fake stars from our beautiful indoor night sky. Well, I guess you can't see them. The sun's still out. But
it's kind of like the Sanger Uptown.
Yes, this is the Sanger of Magazine Street.
Many great presentations occur in this very vicinity.
Does it inspire you to break out in tune?
Not quite.
Okay, well, Steve, I'd like to know a little bit about your born and raised years before we get into interrogating you about today or,
okay,
the recent past. But you are born and raised in New Orleans, correct?
Unlike Ernie Cato, I'm a Turo baby.
You're a Turo baby.
Yeah. And I have seen the signs. That's where babies come from. And in my case, that's the truth. So I was born there.
You were born at Turo?
At Turo, yeah.
And Turo has been around a long time. I'm not trying to date you or anything, but that Turo is...
I think it was back from the 1800s. Yeah, so I'm pretty old.
You look great.
Yeah.
So,
it's all that goat infusion.
Goat infusion?
Goat glands. No.
Goat glands?
No, I don't mess with any of that stuff.
Wait, what do you mean? Eat it? Drink it? I don't know what you mean.
No,
Infuse it? Stem cell research?
No, I knew this fellow that used to go to Switzerland to get like injections of goat glands, and he said it kept him young. And he's been dead a long time. But at any rate, and you know who it was? I probably shouldn't tell you, but he's gone. It was Rodney Fertel, who is Ruth Fertel's husband. Ruth.
Yes, from Ruth Chris Steakhouse.
And Rodney was well known. You're from here too, aren't you?
Yep.
Remember, Rodney was known as the Gorilla Man, and he ran for mayor a couple of times, and I think it was like in the late 60s when he ran for mayor. And his promise was, he had two promises, that he would bring gorillas to Audubon Park Zoo, which he did, even though he didn't win the race to be mayor.
That was in his platform?
Yeah, that was his platform. And the other plank in his platform was that he would let his racehorse graze on the grass in Duncan Plaza.
Duncan Plaza. I'm sorry. Which is where's that?
That's the little grassy rectangle across from City Hall, along the way, like between City Hall and the library. Yeah.
And did he let that happen?
No.
No, because he didn't win.
He didn't have the opportunity. Okay. No.
Well,
he didn't win place or show. But then in the mid-70s, was it? Yes. Towards the late 70s. No, actually, I guess it was the early 80s. Anyway, at some point, there was a new grocery store that opened up on Esplanade called it was called the Whole Food Company, and it was an independently created store here. There was first one on Cone Street, and then they opened one up on Esplanade, and they were later, consumed by Whole Foods Market out of Austin, and so
they were part of. Were they?
No, they were started independently by some people here, and Whole Foods Market was started separately and independently in Austin, and then it grew, and it eventually annexed a number of natural food stores around the country, like Bread and Circus in Boston, and the Whole Food Company in New Orleans, which just happened to have the same name.
Oh, it's a coincidence that they had the same name and started the same time.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I was going to ask you about that. I wanted to hear a little bit about New Orleans and where you were going with that, but weren't you affiliated with that Whole Foods at one time?
I ran the deli. When they opened that store on Esplanade, I ran the deli for a couple of years.
And that was in the 70s?
No, I think it was actually in the early 80s, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
But that's still the beginnings of health food and the whole...
Yeah, that's when the whole health food craze was just kind of getting off the ground, at least in New Orleans. Before that, the only quote-unquote health food stores were these little small box stores that mostly just sold vitamins.
Okay, and but there weren't any health food restaurants like in the 70s in New Orleans, or, I know there's a big surge today of like vegan and raw, but in the 70s in New Orleans there was no...
there was an occasional little, kind of like hippie co-op place.
Like a grocery store, more like a food co-op, or
no,
like
little small health food stores that like All Natural, which was here
All
on
Natural, yes, Magazine Street.
Well, there were a couple, but there was one, and I forget the name of it, but it was right where Taqueria Corona is now.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was All Natural, which was a little farther down Magazine Street, and it had a little... That's on the lake side of Magazine Street.
Right.
And they had a little, cafe in the back. Before that, like maybe in the very early 70s, there were a couple of co-ops that would have food.
So, but how were you into health food? I want to know a little bit about your upbringing, like what your home life was like and how you ate in your home. Did you have like food traditions in your family, or New Orleans traditions revolving around food that inspired you? Or
well, yeah, I think that I probably ate just what anybody else in New Orleans ate. And I'm not sure that's true, but we would always have red beans and rice on Monday. We'd have meatballs and spaghetti on Wednesday. We would always have some sort of seafood on Friday, even, maybe boiled shrimp or whatever. I mean, even if it was fish sticks, which I didn't really like that much. But actually, when I was a little kid, I used to think that things that came out of, like the frozen container was so exotic. Because normally my mother would cook everything fresh, and then when we would have something that came right from the grocery store, I
it was
thought,
exciting.
Wow. Yeah, because it was very foreign and exotic. But we would, have fried oysters. We would have fish. We would have, and then we would grow some things. Like in the summer, my folks always grew tomatoes, and we had figs in the backyard. And then in the fall, we always had melitons that would grow, and so we'd always have that. And usually, we actually, I think, pretty much were locavores, although no one knew that term. For example, the only vegetables we ever really ate were bell peppers and tomatoes and eggplant, and
because they all grew here.
Because they grew here,
it was
yeah.
part of the diet and culture.
Yeah, and scallions, which we all called shallots, and I remember when I was in college, I went to France and I had zucchini, I'd never seen zucchini before.
That's not I guess y'all didn't grow that in your backyard, and
No.
people. It wasn't in restaurant
No.
menus, and
The only squash that I ever saw grown were these white ones that look like flying saucers.
what
You
are
know
they
those?
called? Yeah, I know. I don't know what they're.
I don't know. We just called them squash. And that
But
was the only squash
What
I
about
thought there
Militon?
was.
That's not a squash.
Well, yeah, it is, but I never knew it was a squash. I just thought it was a melon.
Now, is it Militon? We never say anything correct, but how do you say it? Pronounce it?
Melon.
Militon, and it's called other things, other places.
Yeah, like the Hispanics call it chayote.
Chayote.
And if you go down to the Caribbean, like in the French-speaking islands, they call it Christophine.
Christophine, I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So getting back to your family, so
So we would have boiled crabs. We would go over to the Gulf Coast and catch croakers and fry croakers and have boiled crabs and, just whatever.
that's really local, and
I think so.
Now, did that influence your decision? What was your first time cooking outside of your house, independently, for...
It was actually when I started the kitchen at Tipitina's.
What year was that?
I think it was 1978 or 79. We had started Tipitina's in January of 1977, and I did other things. I, would help book the bands and do advertising and things like that. When we took over the lease on that club, the 501 Club, it was called, there was a pretty much full-blown kitchen in there. They even had plates and things, but there was a stove and 3-compartment sink. But we never wanted to do anything with that. We had enough on our plate already to just try to run a little music club. But then I left for 6 or 8 months, and somebody else had taken over the jobs that I was doing. So I thought, well, why don't we try running a kitchen? But I'd never cooked before. I think about the only thing I'd ever really cooked was oatmeal. And, I made the occasional tuna fish sandwich, but I really wasn't much of a cook. But my mother told me, don't worry about it. If you like to eat and you can read a cookbook, you can cook. Because you can read a cookbook and get the general idea of, what's supposed to go in things and how you're supposed to do it. And then if you like to eat, you can just taste whatever it is you're trying to cook and,
So what was the response? And were you doing the foods you grew up with and like local food?
Pretty much. We would do red beans and rice, and we would have these specials like on Monday nights. We would have $1 red beans and $1 spaghetti, and our little motto is $1 won't make you holla. And we got a lunch counter, or as a soda counter, whatever, that from the old Katz and Bestoff that had been on the corner of St. Charles and Napoleon. And when they discontinued that, we bought it. It was like a long lunch counter with the little revolving stools. And so we put that in the club. And, so you could come and have like curb service. And so like on Monday nights, we'd have red beans and rice. But we'd have other things. We'd have pasta with oysters, and we would have some like
all for $1?
No.
Okay.
The specials were vegetarian spaghetti and red beans and rice.
Okay. I want to step back a little
Yeah.
bit, because who did you start it with, and what made you think at that age that you could be in the music business? And what else was going on at the time musically?
Well, there was rhythm and blues on the radio when we were growing up, and then it all sort of went away when the Beatles and the English Invasion came in, the mid '60s. But even after that, we continued to have the iconic Mardi Gras songs. You know, the way other people would have Christmas carols, we would still have the Mardi Gras songs. So we would always hear, for example, Professor Longhair, you know, doing Big Chief and Go to the Mardi Gras, but nobody had ever seen him or knew anything about him. And there really weren't too many places to go hear music. And then, so I got out of high school in 1967 and I went to Tulane. And so during those years, there weren't too many live music clubs. And then the jazz festival sort of, you know, kicked into gear 1969, 70 or so. And we would start hearing some of these, you know, good New Orleans musicians, and we'd want to hear them again, but they wouldn't be playing anywhere. So we started throwing house parties. And we threw house parties, sort of like, you know, pop-up events at different places over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years. And we threw some at the 501 Club. We heard that the guy that was leasing the club wasn't going to renew his lease, and so we just thought, hey, why don't we take over this lease? And we didn't have any idea what we were doing or how to do it. We never had any real experience in the bar business or in the music business, but you know, we didn't think it was hard, so we tried it, and it was fun. It was like, you know, trying to throw a party every night. So we did. And so, to make a long story short, I started a restaurant there about a year or two into the operation.
Okay.
It wasn't the greatest place for a restaurant, so I stopped doing the restaurant there, but I kind of liked cooking, so then I worked at a couple of hotels, and I worked at a couple of other restaurants, and probably the finest restaurant where I worked was Christian's Restaurant, which was not a religious thing. It was named after the owner. His name was Christian Ansel, and he had been one of the Galatois families. He had managed that. So he started his own restaurant, and that's where I met my plus one, which is Mike Ward, who just sat here. Mike was the sous chef, and he was a great cook, still is, and he taught me a lot.
Well, thank you.
Welcome, Mike. Do you go by Mike or Michael? I'm sorry.
Mike.
Mike? Okay. Now, you were a sous chef, and this was in the beginning of...
At Christian's.
At Christian's, okay. And which, in case people don't know, wasn't it a church at one time?
It was a church.
It's a beautiful building.
The owner's
right?
named Christian, so he called it Christian's Restaurant.
Yeah. And everybody thought that the name came from, you know, some sort of feeling of reverence or whatever, but it wasn't. It was just another coincidence.
Mm-hmm. A pun.
Yeah. But it was great food, and I think it was probably Mike that might have come up with the smoked soft-shell crab, and there were the poached fish with the trout mousse and crawfish Nantua, and chicken with blueberries, and I like the redfish with the green peppercorn cream sauce.
Now, those
Mike
are
knew how to do all that.
Yeah, Mike, where did those ideas come from? I mean, that's pretty progressive stuff and sounds very technically
Well, the chef there, his name was Roland Hewitt, and he called me Michael. And he had trouble pronouncing Michael, and so he called me Michael. And he used to live on what he called a dead street. And I never could understand how someone could live on a dead street. But it turns out it was a dead end street, and he just never said the end on it. That's when I finally went to see him at his house. But he was a very creative man. He was an excellent cook. When he first came to the United States, he was brought over by Christian Ansel to be the chef of Galatoire's. And he said when he flew on the plane, he carried a container of demi-glace with him to show him what it was. So he was disillusioned with Galatoire's, and so Christian Ansel decided to open up his own restaurant and use him as a chef. So he was to our benefit that he stayed here.
And that was, where were you before you started there? I mean, what were you cooking somewhere else, or were you?
Yes, I was cooking at LaRuth's restaurant, which was on the West Bank, Warren LaRuth. I don't know if you remember that restaurant. It was
I know
very
the name,
elegant.
but I don't know. I did not experience it. But
Warren
Tell us-
LaRusse was, acknowledged as one of the great New Orleans chefs of all time, and probably a taste master.
And he was very, very concerned with details. And if you were to eat there, you'd sit at a table and the waiter would come and put a pillow underneath your feet. So then you take your shoes off and you dine with your feet on a pillow. And it worked most of the time, except one time, and I'll never forget this, a woman was complaining about the bouillabaisse. She said, this bouillabaisse tastes bad. It tastes awful. And he went out there
It's
and got her
too
another
fishy?
one, and she said, this still tastes bad. This is garbage. And he said, well, I'm sorry, but we're not going to be able to satisfy you. And she said, well, I'm going to stay here until I get something good to eat. And so he had the waiter pull the pillow out from under her feet,
she didn't deserve the pillow after
and
that.
she
for
still
sure.
wouldn't go. And so he lifted up the table and carried it into the kitchen. And they were left sitting there in just their chairs.
Fantastic. Now, what kind of experience did you have that you were working in such a highly regarded and respected kitchen? I mean, did you work your way up, or did you?
Well, I moved to New Orleans from Albuquerque when I graduated from college, and I studied history of the American Indian. And I don't know exactly how it relates to it, but they did have a steak. If you cooked it rare and burned, they called it Indian style. So maybe that was my specialty, my claim to fame. And
You just went in?
I just decided
applied?
when I moved here to become a chef. And so I did an apprenticeship under Willie Coln at the Royal Sonesta, and then I got a job at LaRusse, and then I went to Christians for about 11 years.
Okay, and how long were you at Christians?
At
Steve?
Christians? I was at Christians for about 2 years. After I left Tipitina's, I decided I would like to learn more about cooking also, so I went first to the Le Pavillon Hotel and then to the Fairmont Hotel.
The old Roosevelt?
Yeah,
Okay.
and now the new Roosevelt.
Yeah.
And cooked, there under some, Germans and Frenchmen, and also alongside some Vietnamese women. For a while, I was in what they call garde-manger, which would do a lot of the, the decorative work, the tomato roses and that sort of thing for, buffets or large banquets. And
Like you need to learn knife skills for that, right?
yeah, and those two German chefs that I worked for, and the food and beverage man was a Frenchman. But these Vietnamese women they were more particular and demanding than the German chefs. And I remember one time we had like 300 plates to do, and I thought that, for one or two of them, I'd put the little, cucumber slices at 7 o'clock instead of at 5 o'clock.
You were taking creative
Yeah.
license to.
Oh, and these Vietnamese women just, raised a stink like, like hens that. Anyway, so I learned how to be precise and fast, and worked with a lot of food, and then I went from there, actually to the upper line, and then to Christians. Yeah, so I would work at different places, and then you would kind of learn about as much as you could in one place, and then you would go to another place. That's what I was doing. That was a little bit before the day of people going to, culinary school. So you sort of learned on the job.
And it was a community, and people were supportive, right? And enjoyed passing on. It's like apprenticeship,
It
right?
is,
Like
yes.
More traditional.
We would take externships from the Culinary Institute of America, from the other culinary school in New England Culinary Institute, and we would also get apprentices from Europe. And they would be apprentices for 7 years. And then they would come over and work for a year at Christians. And meanwhile, at the Culinary Institute of America or the New England Culinary Institute, they would produce chefs in like 3 or 4 years. They don't have the same type of ethics or
And how
work
can you
structure.
really learn about how things should be done? I mean, I don't want to be critical, but
Well, they would learn a lot of things in their classroom and labs, and then they would
that's
have to
not real
work for a
world.
year with their knowledge, and they would learn practical application of it.
well, yeah, but you're saying nowadays it's 3 years and
And you get a degree. Mhm.
now let me ask y'all, are either one of you still cooking today?
We're
Professional.
recovering chefs.
You're recovering.
But we both cook almost every day, something or other. We just don't cook it in mass quantities or in multiple units like you would on a factory line, like you sometimes do in a kitchen, or you don't do like 7 things at once. But yeah, we still cook. We're just not professional.
And why is that? I mean, Mike, why?
I already
why
know
did
how
you
to
get
cook,
out of-
so I decided to do something else with my life.
And what
so-
was that after you?
I
So
became.
you worked at Christians for
I worked
7
at
years?
Christians, and then I worked at a hospital. I was the executive chef of Oxnard Hospital for 16 years.
Wow, 16 years.
Mm-hmm.
That is
And-
a lot. What kind of numbers were you producing? I mean, that's a different
Well, you have
kitchen.
2,500 employees and 400 patients and catering, and so it's a large amount of food. So now I'm a bamboo man.
And that's how I met you. I love your. Do you still have a location?
We used to be right on Magazine here across from Perlis. However, I closed that location. Now we're in the Art Egg Studios.
Oh, neat. What other things are going on in that building over there? I
Oh
haven't been-
gosh, there's all kinds of things. There's movie set production people. There are Rethink New Orleans is there. There's artist studios. There's a producing company. There's a recording studio. There's an absinthe distillery there.
Ah. Do you ever stop in the distillery and?
Absolutely.
Is it a just like a production facility, or do they?
It's where they
allow
make the
people-
absinthe. And yeah, you
Can
can
you
go there.
go in
On
and view it
Saturday,
and-
you can go in and they have open sales for people on Saturday morning. But you can also buy it. It's called Red Toulouse. You might have seen it in
Yeah.
the grocery stores.
I've seen it at Dorniak's.
Mm-hmm. And they make rice gin. They make all kinds of things.
So tell everyone about the name of your business and a little bit about what you do.
Sure.
And how people would be able to get in contact with you.
The name of my business is New Orleans Bamboo, and we sell green building supplies, and we will be able to supply you with things in your house that don't emit any VOCs, things that are good for your body in your house. And we've been in business since 2007, and we also do things like custom window shades, and we install rainwater harvesting systems such as cisterns, like one you need to get repaired. And we're doing fine. It's a very nice way to change careers. I'm enjoying it a lot.
So what was he
Mike-
like to work with at Christians? Was he always had an answer
God.
for you?
Oh, he just never would shut up. It was just it was just too much fun. No, it was good because we worked real hard, and Chef Roland was a pretty stern taskmaster. He expected things to be done a certain way, and just that way, and quickly, and right, and the kitchen was very well organized, and Roland really was more of a master chef cook. Now, I mean, some chefs are more like executives, and they do the ordering, they do the scheduling, they do a lot of the business parts of a restaurant. Well, he delegated all of that to Mike. So Mike was the organizer, and so he kept things going, but he also knew exactly how to cook everything there, and it was great food. So so Mike made sure that everything was done well, and that way you could take pride in what you did, and so you liked being there because you were doing good things. But it was still fun.
Great.
So it was good.
Well, before we hear about what you did after your cooking experiences, we go to a part of the show called Off the Menu, where we're going to ask you a couple of questions you wouldn't be asked in culinary school or on a job interview. At least not a job either of y'all would want. But before we get to that, I'd like to take a moment to tell you about our sponsors for our show tonight. Petite Pet Care. If you're going out of town or your schedule keeps you away from home, or if you're going back to the cooking world and have to leave your pet alone for 17 hours a day, Petite Pet Care have you covered. They come to your house so you don't have to board your pet or take them to doggy daycare. For loving care when you're not there, go to petitepetcare.com. And thanks to our friends at Wayfair for giving our Midnight Menu Plus One listeners 10% off of everything on their fantastic Wayfair menu. Plus, they have 3 happy hours every day from 4 to 7. Chef Kevin White puts fine dining into a sandwich, and the bartenders put all kinds of great stuff into the cocktails. Okay, so as promised, I have some questions for y'all. One question each. Okay.
I don't know if that's a promise or a threat.
Well, we'll have an answer.
Yeah.
Yes.
If we don't know, we'll make it up.
All right. These won't be too painful. Okay, Stephen, if you could cook for and dine with any musician, living or dead, who would it be?
I think I would like to cook for Duke Ellington.
Okay.
Yeah. And now that I'm thinking about it, and we talked about Christians, I remember reading that Duke Ellington used to like to have a steak for breakfast because that way he would always have his protein. Well, we had a dish at Christians called filet Bayou La Loutre, and it was like an 8-ounce filet, and it would be grilled or broiled, but there'd be a poached oyster inside, and then it would be covered with demi-glace. And I think he would like that, and I would like cooking that for him.
Wonderful.
And the La Loutre comes from the bayou where the oysters came from. It's in Hopedale.
Okay,
where Mike fishes.
It
where
would
we
be
fish.
And I fish with him sometimes, yeah.
Would y'all go fishing or have time to do that when you were at Christians? Did you know, were y'all doing that back then, or is that something you
No,
figured
we
out?
didn't. But people would drive up and sell us fish in the parking lot.
So the oysters would come directly from
Bayou La Loutre, from the Hopedale area.
And what we would do together while we were at Christians was go look for wild mushrooms. And I think that was because of the influence of Chef Roland Hewitt. I think he probably taught us both a love and skill for looking for wild mushrooms, and we still do that.
And where did you do that at the time in New Orleans? I mean, when you were at the restaurant, and do you go back to some of the same spots, or are those
We
no
usually
longer?
go to the other side of the lake.
Well, we go to the other side of the lake in the summer to look for chanterelles. But in winter months, like maybe in mid to late December, you can get oyster mushrooms, pleurats, and a lot of times you can find those on willow trees right in New Orleans. Maybe
on the growing, they grow off the tree?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can find them on the Batcher as well. There's a lot of willow trees there.
And can you just go, people just walk in there in the Batcher, or do you have to look like you live in that little area?
You don't go where those homes are, but just cross over the levee, and
right
the
in
water's down that time of year. Just start looking at the trees.
Yeah. I've actually found them in Armstrong Park and City Park.
And do y'all, so obviously you take them home, and do you cook meals together too and celebrate, or you just bring them home and cook them for your families? And
Both.
Yes.
Yeah.
We went on just
Yesterday.
yesterday morning.
Just
yes,
last yesterday.
and picked chanterelles.
so does this do they come up quick? Like
3 days.
3 days after
A rain.
it'll come up? Because we had a landscaper at our house, and he was leaving, and I thought he had hurt himself because he was like, you know, his arms up, and he was so excited. And we had chanterelles growing in our yard.
Really? Where do you live?
I live
She lives.
near
I know where
Metairie
she lives.
Cemetery. Yeah. And but I swear I did not see them there that morning. Like maybe I didn't notice them, and I wouldn't know how do you distinguish that is? Are they completely unique looking? And
They're very easy to identify because they're orange and they don't have gills. They're shaped like a trumpet sticking out of the ground, and they smell like apricots.
okay, so nothing else is similar. That if I go back to the same spot and he cut them so that they wouldn't. He didn't pull them up. He cut them with a knife so that.
He wouldn't get the dirt from the roots.
Yeah, and do y'all do that? Is that a part of foraging? Like you
Have a
to
pair of
do it-
scissors and you cut
Scissors.
every one.
Okay.
But it's not because you're being gentle to the plant. The plant is actually under the ground. It's called a mycelium. And when it shoots up a mushroom, it's kind of like an apple on an apple tree. It's the way it propagates itself.
It's like the fruit of the mycelium.
Picking an apple doesn't hurt a tree, and picking a mushroom doesn't hurt the plant. But when you
Okay.
pull it out of the ground, it has dirt on it, so you cut it to get the dirt away from your bunch of
So it's
forested
not
mushrooms.
to maintain the
Mm-mm.
propagation. It's just
Just for cleanliness.
okay.
Make them easier to clean.
All right. Well, good. I don't feel bad that the gardener's been pulling them up. Maybe I've been missing all these chanterelles, but maybe they'll come back.
Oh, they will.
Yeah, they'll be back.
Okay. Well, wait. We almost.
Oh, you have
almost got
another
out of your
question. Yeah, that's
yes.
right. Don't
So-
let him off easy.
Michael, if you could cook one last meal in your life, what would it be?
Some type of seafood, because I love seafood. Maybe a trout mousse with some crab meat or something with seafood.
Okay.
It's so delicious.
All right. See, that wasn't too painful.
Mm.
But let me ask y'all about the fish dish at Christian's. Wasn't it how was the mousse made? And I want to know about the soft shell crab, because it wasn't that a unique process or is it a traditional?
No, that was unique. We invented that.
Okay,
I
will you
did.
share with us what?
We would take the crabs. We'll start with the soft shell crabs, the smoked crabs. We would get the crabs live, and we would put them in a chilled smoker that never got over 50 degrees, 45 degrees. And we would smoke the crabs for approximately an hour. And when we would get the crabs out of the smoker, they'd still be alive. So then we would take them and serve
You'd
them.
smoke them alive.
Hmm.
Okay, and is that why the temperature is what it is, or is it?
Well, that kept them fresh because they wouldn't die. And so soft shell crab is better when you cook it right when it's alive, when you prepare it. It's the best it's going to be. So we were able to get the smoke flavor into the crab without
Killing it.
compromising, the quality of the meat. So that's probably why it was such a hit.
Huh.
So you might have your smoking box several feet away from the box where the crabs are, and then maybe the smoke would travel through a pipe, and by the time it would get to, say, the refrigerator box, it would be cool. And you might even want to put it in an actual refrigerator, but just cut a hole in it and have the refrigerator still going. But the heat could also cause the crab to dry and maybe shrivel too. But like Mike said, you wanted to keep it alive, but you want to infuse it with the smoke flavor.
Wow.
So that's that dish.
Mm-hmm. And the trout mousse? Trout mousse is such a great dish. It's one of my favorite things to make. And I still make it. And I initiate people all the time. I say, hey, do you want to taste some trout mousse? What? And they say, no. And then when you let them taste it, then they're hooked. Then they have to have more. But It's made with trout and egg whites and cream, and that's just about it.
It's pureed into a
You puree the fish, you add egg white, and then you add salt to the fish first, then you puree it, and then you add egg white, and then you put in a little cream, and then you have to put in a bowl over ice and stir with a wooden spoon in the rest of the cream till it's the right consistency.
Delicious.
And then you lay out a fillet of, say, trout, and then you lay the trout mousse across it or along it, and you smooth it out, and then poach it.
Wonderful. Well, unfortunately, we are coming to the end of our evening, but we're going to extend it a little bit because we have to know what you did after you stopped cooking professionally and why. I mean, besides why, like, what do you do now, Stephen?
Well, I'm a lawyer. And I became a lawyer because I got tired of being on my feet 8 or 12 hours a day and working every weekend. And also, unless you own your own restaurant, you're not likely, you're not likely to earn very much money. And most people who work as line cooks or, sous chefs or whatever, get very little money and no benefits. And so I was getting to this age where I was tired of being on my feet all the time, tired of working every weekend, and I didn't think I wanted to open my own restaurant, or else, sometimes if you get a job as like the head chef at a hotel or a big restaurant, you can earn a pretty good wage, but they pretty much expect you to work forever, 60 hours a week or more. So I decided to become a lawyer because that also seemed like a service industry where you could help people and solve their problems. And a lot of things that I would read about that were interesting seemed to end up in the clutches of lawyers. And so it seemed like a good thing to do. So I became a lawyer.
Okay.
And I did that while I was up in Boston.
And how long were you in Boston?
Well, I went there for 6 years. My wife wanted to go to school there. She went to become an occupational therapist. So I continued to cook there in restaurants for 3 years and also did some catering on the side, and then started law school and still did some catering while I was in law school. But then when I finished, we moved back to New Orleans, and I've been practicing law here since then.
Okay. Well, I'd like to know, too, a few people that y'all have served in your culinary careers in New Orleans, and perhaps Stephen in Boston or here, before you became a lawyer. What was your greatest
when I was
moment
at Tipitina's, I served the entire Rock and Doopsie band, including and Clifton Chenier. I also cooked for Stevie Ray Vaughan, Doc Watson, John Lee Hooker, several people, who came through, and I'd cook for them. In Boston, I worked for this high-end catering company, and we cooked for a lot of special events. Some of them, like at the Kennedy Library, I remember cooking for Nelson Mandela.
Ooh.
I cooked for the entire Kennedy clan, including Jackie O and her kids and Teddy. Bill Clinton was there. I didn't cook for him, but I was about 6 feet away from the presidential tuna fish sandwich. That's what he ordered, but it was made, I think, under the careful surveillance of a Secret Service guy, but somebody else did that. Benazir Bhutto, I cooked for her, and I remember she walked right by me. She was so beautiful in the long sari, and a bunch of people. The whole Boston Mafia. It was a wedding for some, mafia guy's daughter. And it was at his big mansion on the top of this hill, and there were helicopters surrounding, and all of the bodyguard chauffeurs were over on the side while we were cooking. That was fun.
Fun.
Stevie Wonder, I cooked for Stevie Wonder.
Wow.
Anyway.
Do you have any?
I don't have anything like that.
What about the most horrendous experience you had besides the woman with the that you personally had to deal with?
There weren't that many horrendous experiences because being in the back of the house, the maitre d' or the owner or someone, they will go out and deal with the people. And you can stay in the kitchen, you're isolated, you can vent, you could say you don't have to be polite to them, you're being protected by the people in the front. But we did one time have a party for Elizabeth Taylor. She was in town doing a play down Sanger, I believe. And she requested that we open up early for her to eat before she was going to go down and perform. So we did. And she brought in her entourage, and there were probably about 30 people, and they all ate. And then when she got ready to leave, the owner, Christian Ansel, asked her if he could take a picture with her at the front of the restaurant. And she said no. And they left. So I don't know if you'd call that, nice or anything. But
Well, y'all, unfortunately, we are out of time. I want to thank y'all for being our guests tonight on Midnight Menu Plus One. Our guest this evening was Steve Armbruster, and Steve's Plus One was Mike Ward. And you can find out more about our guests by following the links on the site itsneworleans.com. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or just Google Midnight Menu Plus One, and we come right up. And then I thank y'all very much for joining us this evening, because I know your time is precious.
And thank you for having us.
It was fun.
Thank you
I enjoyed
so
it.
much.
You're welcome.
And thanks tonight to Wayfare on Ferret Street. Remember, you can get 10% off of everything on the menu when you tell your server you heard it on Midnight Menu Plus One. And thanks also to Petite Pet Care and to Monkey Hill Bar on Magazine Street, where they have happy hour every weeknight and now Taco Tuesdays. $2 tacos, margaritas, and sangria.
Wow.
See y'all next time on Midnight Menu Plus One, and Ray will be back. Thanks.
Midnight Menu Plus One is produced by Grant Morris, Margot Moss, and Ray Canata. Our technical producer is Chris Kehoe. Our director of everything else is Mary Ross. Thanks to our sponsors who made tonight's show possible, Wayfare on Ferret Street. As a reward for getting all the way through to the end of the show, you get 10% off your tab when you tell your server Ray or Margot from Midnight Menu Plus One sent you. Also, Petite Pet Care for loving care when you're not there. Find those guys at petitepetcare.com. If you'd like to be a sponsor of Midnight Menu Plus One, get in touch with us on our website at itsneworleans.com, or just email sales@itsneworleans.com. If you'd like to be a guest or suggest a guest for Midnight Menu Plus One, you can do that on our website too. You can find photos from tonight's show, check out our blog, and all sorts of other great stuff on itsneworleans.com, including our other shows: Out to Lunch, Happy Hour, Vietnola, True to the Game, and Mindset. You can hook up with Margot and Ray anytime by following Midnight Menu Plus One on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. The awesome audio quality of the show is brought to us in part by Chris Kehoe's Magic, and the rest of it is done by PreSonus Audio. More information about all the wonderful sound recording equipment that PreSonus makes is at their website, presonus.com. Midnight Menu Plus One is a production of INO Broadcasting. For itsneworleans.com, for all of us here at Midnight Menu Plus One, thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here next week around the New Orleans podcast dining table. Ray Canata and Margot Moss will be back then. Good night.
Summer's almost over, but at Old Navy the styles are as hot as ever. Get to Old Navy now for 30% off all jeans, 40% off all dresses, and 50% off all tees. That's right, get 30, 40, and 50% off all your favorite styles for the whole family, plus up to 75% off clearance. Hurry in fast. These deals won't last. The sale ends soon at Old Navy and OldNavy.com. Valid in-store 8/22 to 8/28 and online 8/22 to 8/24. Excludes in-store clearance, bubbles, active, licensed, and men's package tees.